economic development at DFID. The way I want to structure this session is, first of all, to introduce the panel. Then I want to tell you some of our thinking at DFID, what we want to do in the energy space. Then we'll open up the discussion. I've got a couple of questions for the panel, but then we want you also to ask some questions. So as we're talking, please be thinking of the questions that you'd like to put to the panel. And then I want to wrap up with a sense of, how can the UK and DFID and the wider government in the UK help to move forward on investment in the African power sector. Okay, so let me introduce the panel. To my left, immediately, I've got His Excellency Honourable Ambassador Henry Macaulay, who's the Minister of Energy in Sierra Leone, which is a country I know is really pushing forward with power sector reform. We then have Same Shanuda, who's the Head of Infrastructure at CDC, which is the UK government's development finance institution. We've got Alex Catton, who is the Executive Director at Africa, part of the PIDGE facility, again, something that we, as the UK government, are a major funder of. To my right, we've got John Gibbs, who's a partner and director at PwC, doing a lot of work in various African countries on power sector reforms. And then, last but not least, we have got Richard Parry, who's a partner in Electra. Okay, so if I spend a couple of minutes just talking about DFID, I hope that you've heard at DFID we've got a new, an increased focus on economic development. So the question is there, what is it that we can do to support governments and to promote inclusive economic growth? And as we try to answer that question, we've gone through in all of our countries an analytical exercise, a diagnostic process. So we've got a tool that we call inclusive growth diagnostics, where we say what are the opportunities for growth, what are the challenges, and then how can we address those challenges. And probably not surprisingly, given that you all work in the energy industry, that very quickly takes to energy is the binding constraint in pretty much all of our countries to inclusive economic growth. So as we focus on economic development, within that, one of the key pillars of our approach is going to be the energy sector. Now, as we think about the energy sector, and we know this is a really busy space, so we've got the World Bank, the African Development Bank, and President Adesina, who said energy is one of his high 5 priorities. So we've got Power Africa, we've got other donors, we've got the European Commission, many players in this space. So we have to ask, well, what's our value added? How can we help move this forward? And that, again, is something I really want to understand from the panel and from the audience. What is it we can usefully do? We don't want to compete with others. We don't want to spend money for the sake of it. We want to complement and to leverage what is happening so that we can move forward with investments that address that energy bottleneck. And the way we're thinking, well, there's a whole bunch of things that are, if you like, upstream, related to, ultimately, tariffs. How are you going to get cash flows which can make investments bankable? But you get into, well, what's the role for government, the laws, the regulations, what is the role for the utilities, what kind of utility reforms are needed? So, that whole upstream piece, which is about getting cash flows into the system, off the back of which you can have investments. So that's one area. I think there is another area, which is project development. And again, that's something we're involved in. People say, well, there aren't enough projects around. There's plenty of finance, but not enough projects. So that is another area that, for example, through Africa and Asia, in the PIDGE facility, we are looking to finance. And then you get into the finance space that, okay, well, if all you did was the upstream stuff and you got the conditions in place and you sat back and you wait for the private sector to come in, you might be waiting a long time. So you need, that catalytic finance, the kind of thing that CDC is doing, including through GlobalX. So, we are thinking about that technical assistance policy dialogue upstream. We're thinking about the project development, and then we're thinking about the investment finance and what can we do there. So that is where we've got to. We will publish, actually, a new energy policy framework in the next few weeks, and we will back that up with very significant resourcing. So, we have a large amount of money in relative terms to spend on technical assistance working with governments. We will spend billions of pounds, actually, on catalytic investment finance over the next 4 years. So we will be a serious player, but as I say, we want to get value for money. We want to work with governments and make sure we get the biggest bang for the buck. And so that's why this is particularly interesting for me today. I think that's enough about DFID. And I think, as I say, what I want to do is ask a pretty general, open-ended question to give the panel a chance to set out some of their thinking. Then I want to open up for about half an hour, if we can, of questions from the floor, which the panel will engage in. So without further ado, my question is, okay, if what we want to do is to mobilize investment, to get assets on systems so that we can address those energy constraints and unblock economic growth. If that's what we want to do, well, what is it that needs to be done in order to achieve that objective? So, is it that tariff space? Is it the government space? Is it the utility reform? Is it working with the transmission and distribution companies? Or is it, actually all of that's done now? I suspect the answer is no, but is it that we need a lot more effort on project development? Or is it that there are issues around finance? There isn't enough finance, or local currency finance is an issue. And we've got the opportunity to hear from government perspectives, from investor perspectives, and then technical experts as well. So I think we should get a really good answer to that open question of what are the big challenges to moving forward with that investment story. So I'm going to start by asking Henry, who again is the Minister of Energy and Ambassador in Sierra Leone. What do you think, Henry?
Thank you very much, David. Good afternoon, everyone. I must say, first of all, at the outset that David has been quite supportive of us in Sierra Leone. I think many people know that the UK government has been a traditional partner and friend in Sierra Leone, supporting us when we had our war, supporting us when we had Ebola, and now that Mr. President has set his priorities, which are basically to have us bounce back to our development trajectory where we were, David is again with us. But I think David's question, or what David is trying to find out, is how far is that type of cooperation affecting sustainable growth, and what more can be done? Actually, I think Sierra Leone is a good enough case to study, because when you talk about utility reform, when you talk about policies, Sierra Leone has done quite a lot in that respect. In fact, we're known as one of the world's best reformers. Right now, we have unbundled the utility. We have generation and transmission, distribution and supply. We have a regulator in place. And we're also currently setting up a collection account mechanism because we have restrictions with issuing sovereign guarantees and other types of risk mitigating instruments. And obviously, recognizing that the distribution company is the cash register, because that's the end at which monies are collected, which can help to make the rest of the value chain credible and sustainable. So we want to make sure there's transparency and accountability at that end. So we're doing all the right things. Renewable energy space, lots of you will know that we just launched our energy revolution, which is to bring vast amounts of renewable energy power to rural areas. Was supported by DFID again, and a similar pattern to the DFID Energy Africa initiative of last October. So a lot is happening, but a lot more needs to happen. I think one of the areas in which we need to look into very, very seriously is probably that of speed. Because as we all know, Africa, the statistics are well known, 650 million people, blah, blah, blah. But what have we actually been doing about it? I made a joke once, I think it's another forum of this nature, that population is growing faster than energy access is growing in Africa. That's the truth. And in Sierra Leone, it looks like the turnover of ministers of energy is going faster than energy is growing. And this is simply because consumers are impatient, governments are impatient. We see the problems, see the difficulty that we undergo when we do not have energy, when our people do not have electricity, and it's painful. Every sector is affected Women and children are affected. Kids can study. Women can do their businesses. Farmers can't farm well. There's no irrigation. The access to water suffers, etc., etc. These are well known. So what can we do to align our systems, align our procedures and processes so that we can get to the same targets at the same time? Also, I think that the collection account mechanism that we're now creating, I think probably the DFIs need to come in at the inception stage so that it is created as a fit-for-purpose model that they themselves will own and will support. I think that's also important. But I think in general, so I can allow other panelists to make their own statements, I think in general, each country in Africa will have its own peculiar situation. And I think one size fits all does not work. Because in Sierra Leone, for example, we have serious constraints in terms of funding, in terms of even borrowing, according to the borrowing limits that have been set for us by the IMF, which are quite restrictive. Does not even make room, I believe, for investments in energy. So a genuine investor and a genuine partner will come and think of ways of being creative to solve the problem. The problems are there. They differ from the set of problems in another country. So what will the investors want to do? What will they think about doing when they come? I think those are issues that will be discussed. And I think I spoke about the technical support. Technical support is fine. But I recall we had some technical support from one of the DFIs, I won't mention the name, and they were sitting in a foreign country offering us technical support. That doesn't work. You need to be on the ground and do the correct assessment. So I think, David, this is what I will say initially. But of course, just to end up to say that in electricity, all the areas are interdependent. Generation depends on transmission depends on distribution depends on collection. And if you don't address each area, that is why we seem to be failing in most of our countries, because you have the investors who want to invest in generation, then when they come, they say, but you do not have the distribution or the transmission to evacuate my power, so they wouldn't come. So what's going to happen in the interim? I think so that's where, as you think about engineering your support, that's where you need to look at how you can fill in those gaps. Maybe you come in at the early stages, maybe you come in and help fix the distribution, while at the same time encouraging the generation.
Great, thank you, Henry. So really important points there. It's got to be a systems approach. Can't be a one-size-fits-all. Remote technical assistance isn't very useful. Early investor involvement probably is useful. Can I turn to Sami, an investor perspective on that set of issues?
Thank you. Thank you, Your Excellency. I think the way I would look at it is to follow the cash. Where is the cash going? Where is it starting from? So the end user, the house owner that is paying his or her bill, and then follow that cash through the chain and try to solve for the chain. So starting with the distribution companies, in our view, there are 3 big issues or 4 big issues in distribution. First, the tariffs are usually not cost reflective. Second, the access to the actual distribution is not sometimes there. And then third, the actual losses and the quality of the distribution companies technically is not strong, which leads to the next step, which is how creditworthy is the off-taker? Can the off-taker pay to the generation company? And if it doesn't, then the government will have to provide credit support. Well, how sustainable is the credit support that the government will provide? And usually the credit support or the credit guarantee will be in foreign currency while the collection is in local currency. So that's another strain on the government or on the off-taker. Then we move to transmission, which is usually owned by government. The funding is usually not there. And there are significant land issues for the transmission lines to go through the country from where the generation is to where the end user is. Then you go to the generation, which is where most of the private sector is focused on, but they are focused on the late stage development side. What we have done at CDC is that we've acquired Globalec, and we have signed a partnership agreement with the Aga Khan to develop another platform and focus only on early stage development. Because what we see in African countries is that there are small developers who develop a project for a few years. They think they're very close to financial close, then they invite people to come in, other more structured and institutional developers, and the project is just not bankable, and they have to start all over again. So starting from the early stage and spending money in early stage development is a key thing that we at CDC are focusing on through the platforms that we've invested in through Globalec and others. Which leads to the most upstream point, let's say, which is government. So the government will have to do a number of things. Obviously, the regulatory framework has to be there. The human capacity in the government and within the lenders has to be there. There are governments who have encouraged third-party support, like, for example, DFID, what DFID has done in NIAF in Nigeria, that helped the government to unbundle the sector. So the fact of the human capacity within government is also quite an important one. The foreign exchange risk is a big one, again, with PPAs being a lot of times in foreign currency, while the collection, as I said, is in local currency. The tariff regimes have to be adhered to. Whether or not there is an election coming up should have nothing to do with tariffs. We've seen a number of countries reducing their tariffs rather than keeping it or increasing it just before elections. So there's a political risk element also that has to be looked at. I think the last thing that I would like to talk about is the lenders. Usually a power project in Africa takes 3 to 5 years to develop. In my personal view, and I think bankers will disagree with that, but I think half of that time is spent on raising the debt. And this is just a big challenge for everyone, for the developers, for the private sector equity investors, for the government. And there are some innovative solutions that people are thinking of, because this is, in my view, a very critical bottleneck. In some cases, for example, large lending organizations such as OPIC could write the full check of the debt. So you don't have to coordinate between 7 or 8 players, seven or eight lenders, for example. There are a few ideas that have not been tested yet, which is corporate lending up to COD of a project, and then you refinance it. But then the risk there is, how can you guarantee that the lenders would then agree to refinance and not say that this is not a bankable project? But in my view, the lenders on the debt side of the business is one that takes a lot of time. There is quite a lot of DFI involvement. And if it wasn't for the DFI involvement on the debt side also, it would have been even harder. But we need to think a bit about how to reduce the time, as the minister said, on the debt side, on the project development side, and all through the chain up to the end user. Thank you.
Thank you, Sami. So, I mean, one thing that sticks in my mind there, cash flow. Follow the cash, and it starts with the tariffs and the collections. Take that system-wide approach that Henry talked about. It flows through distribution, transmission, and it has to go back to investors, otherwise they won't invest. And I think you also agreed with Henry about the early involvement of investors as well, which is important. Now, I'm going to welcome an additional panel member, which is Mamadou Touré, who's the founder and chairman of Africa 2, chairman and chief exec, also of Ubuntu Capital. I'm going to come to you in a minute, Mamadou, but I'm going to ask Richard Parry, who has experience from project development through the investment cycle, to give us a quick overview of his thinking.
Thanks, David. I think I would be tempted to pick 2 binding constraints on how to deliver more energy in Africa. And those 2 binding constraints would be the importance of developing more resources to the early stage of project development, particularly for larger projects. And I think the second binding constraint, which has been mentioned a little bit by the Honourable Minister, is that of capacity within the utilities and within the government to produce what we all need, which is a rapid delivery of increased generation and distribution. So within these two binding constraints, I think the UK, frankly, deserves some accolade. They, 12 years ago, set about setting up some project development companies that were independent of government, but nonetheless publicly funded. A huge step in terms of progress to provide money for the very high-risk part of the development cycle. And frankly, the money for the development cycle is still very scarce. I see in the audience at least two clients, and I would love to hear from them on what their views are of the supply of development capital. If you are a private developer in an African country, it is incredibly difficult to raise the money required. And for a larger hydro project, for example, the development costs are going to be around $8 to $10 million. That is a boatload of money for a private individual to find from their own savings and resources. So the programs that DFID has initiated, I think, are a huge help. And Alex Caton here, who's the current head of Infraco Africa, I'm sure is going to talk more about that. The second theme of constraint, government capacity, sometimes it is simply that there is expertise, but it's not available. I was talking to someone in the welcome cocktail last night, to a developer, and she said her favorite trick was actually to invite the members with whom she was negotiating a PPA away from the capital city in order to get their time and attention. And so it's not always the case that there is a problem of capacity, but it's availability of capacity. And I'm sure that Sifa and Tom, who's sitting in the front row, can tell stories about the difficulty of pushing forward in negotiation of a PPA. So there you have it.
Thank you very much, Richard. So two binding constraints, capacity, project development. You mentioned that Alex also has a lot of experience in project development. Do you want to come in there and talk? You know, is it a project development bottleneck? Is it something else? Or is it a whole range of things that we need to be working on?
Sure, thanks. So I'm Alex Caton at Infraco, and I think as Richard was alluding, we get asked quite often, particularly by DFID in fact, why haven't we done more projects this year? And when I say done more projects, Infraco finances early stage project development for infrastructure generally, mostly in the power sector. So this is exactly what we do. And putting skilled developer teams like Electra with experience on the ground and getting the right people both on the developer team and on the government side, I'd say is the key challenge to getting projects to happen quicker. I agree with all the other things, and a lot of the minister has outlined, I think, very precisely. Within any country, there's a series of other possible constraints as well as people and as well as development capital. You may not have the right tariff, you may not have the right skills in the utility, you may not have the right government commitment, which I think is another key metric for us. My first investment committee question every time is going to be, is the government committed to this project? Because if you don't have commitment on the government side, and Sierra Leone, I think we could say as an example where we have found commitment. One of our sister facilities, EIF, to try and help on the government side resourcing, has funded, I think, 2 internal advisors in the Ministry of Energy as an example of strengthening government side resourcing. So the IPP and the developer comes in and has someone to talk to, understands exactly what the issues are, and suddenly you make progress. So I think at the large-scale project-financed IPP question, government or the government counterparty is key. We can fund developers to go in and the right skills of developers to get on one side of the table. We need the same on the other. And then I think at smaller scale, the other question I think that was raised is how do you accelerate getting infrastructure on the ground, delivering projects? And I think the acceleration question is even harder because it's not, to find the right person and put them in the ministry in Sierra Leone, it's not like it happens next month. Putting together a team, it doesn't happen in a week. These things take 3 to 6 months, maybe a year to get the right people and an expat, if it's an expat or hired within Sierra Leone to work in the ministry. So the time takes, is a key constraint. And a way to shortcut that, and I think we're going to move on to maybe talk about quicker delivery of infrastructure. And obviously the big thing that's changed, in my view, this year in the sector is solar and off-grid solar, and how much more quickly that can deliver a result. So we've just invested in a business in Tanzania, as an example, that can put a solar farm down. It's only 1/10 of a megawatt per go, but in 6 days. Now, our average deal closing time is 5.5 years. So suddenly, over the last 10 years, that's been how long it's taken to start building one of our projects. So that's how long it takes in these first-of-a-kind, difficult, without the regulatory framework environment. So I think the right people is one key, and getting the right type and the right scale of project for the right country is a second key. If you have very, very big ambitions, it's going to take 10 years every time. If it's 0.1 of a megawatt and it provides power to 3,000 people, why not do that in 6 weeks or 6 days? So I think a larger scale of investment is one of the key things that Infraco has picked up in the last 12 months. We should be working with developer teams on the ground and more people on the ground in Africa, in country. And then we should be looking at a wider range of projects. We've done nearly $1 billion, our project in Ghana that Electra developed for us. It's a large CCGT. And we've done a 0.1 megawatt project now in Tanzania, or a 1.5 megawatt project, which is serving 35,000 people on an island, Lake Victoria, the very smaller projects. So I think I don't know if that answers the question of what's needed, but I think with that scale, there's lots of opportunity to provide capital and expertise to make these things accelerate, both sides of the table.
Okay, so let's make sure we've got the right teams. The other thing is actually, I'm getting from you, it's not that you've got the government there and the project developers, investors there, and they don't talk. You've got to work together and have that conversation and make the investment happen, and that needs a back and forth. Now, Mamadou, I'm just going to give you the question, actually, because I've realized you haven't heard what I asked the rest of the panel, which is, how can we move forward, increasing energy access, both on-grid and off-grid? What is it that needs to happen? Is it on the government side, the utility side? Is it project development? Is it finance? What's your view on that, Mamadou?
I think it's a bit of a combination of all of the above. Let's start maybe with the process that you see today. So the development time frame in Africa from development stage to financial close go from 4 to 7 years. Now, in the Middle East and Latin America, it's generally 2 to 3 years max. And one of the key reasons for that is that the framework, at least to address the power sector in those countries, is a bit better structured with more capacity, where they basically analyze the actual needs and the energy mix that is required, that will be required over the next 10 years. Do the necessary study, prepare standardized PPAs, and then bidders come for each separate power opportunity. with the actual technical, financial, etc. credentials so that they can operate and move faster. I think on the African continent, we would gain much by actually structuring better, and I think DFID could play a very strong role working with governments in looking at streamlining the process. Because there's so much, I was about to say waste of energy, but that's actually that's actually the case where, you know, you have so many projects, not all of them will go through, and it takes so much energy from, you know, governments, operators, investors, etc. I think that's one thing. Second thing is upgrade. So I personally strongly believe that it will be through upgrade energy that Africa will be able to catch up. You still need baseload, unarguably, right? From you know, generation capacity from an industrial point of view, but to reduce the electrification gap. You basically, and that's what you see happening today with the likes of Mkopa, off-grid electric, etc., where you basically leverage on the same model as the at mobile telecommunications 15 years ago in Africa, to now apply it straight for energy, where you have energy kits that you can deploy, and that would help a lot. And I think also the role of DFID in this particular area is extremely important in helping and working with African countries in order to breach that gap. What will probably happen should that particular area be a strong focus, it will go much faster than the traditional you know, PPP, PPA model that requires so much constraints from banks, from investors, and from an environmental point of view. So I think upgrade is a big promise, in my view, for Africa. And also, when you think of it, you now can, I mean, you have mining companies, you know, Anglo-American, for instance, who are switching to solar electricity to power their mines. Actually, I think NL won the bid in South Africa. So industry is also looking at upgrade and renewable upgrade as a credible alternative. And I think, you know, working with DFID on the regulatory framework, on the capacitation, because there is a need of capacity. You know, whether it's there or available, it is not enough, right? That's a fact. Obviously the last point is how can we work better in supporting entrepreneurs who are venturing into this space across the continent, which is a very difficult, complex environment. And I think along those lines, you know, the financial support and the early stage risk-taking that where the banks won't go, and where, you know, development finance institutions can play a significant role, should also be taken into consideration.
Great, Mamadou, you have really done what I wanted there, which is give me the opportunity to make a pitch for DFID's Energy Africa initiative. So you talked about Mkopa. We were very excited seeing what Mkopa and others have done in that off-grid, small solar space for lighting and for phone charging, and that inspired us to start the Energy Africa initiative. And that is partnerships that we are have entered into already with around 15 governments in Africa. As part of that approach, the governments will commit to do what is needed on the regulatory side. We will provide the technical assistance in order to support that happening. You've talked about support for entrepreneurs. We will have available seed finance for entrepreneurs to develop their business models and approaches. And then as companies are starting to roll out, we hope very quickly, again, we've heard this provides the opportunity to give much more rapid access, then we will have working capital available as well. So this is a really important and exciting space for us. I hope many of you have heard, because it does have a good profile, of the Energy Africa initiative. And if anybody wants to talk to me or the DFID team, please follow up and do that. But that is a big part of our approach. It's not all that, because you need that on-grid, larger scale, IPP, power purchase agreements model as well, but it's going to take both to get that access. Now, if you're getting ready with your questions, we've got one more panelist, John Gibbs, who, just to remind you, is the partner and director at PwC, and then I'm going to open it up to the floor for a few questions. So, John, please tell us your thinking.
Thank you, thank you. I've kind of got that unenviable slot of being the last one on a panel of experts. And of course, I agree with everything everyone has said. Wow! I've written down a few points, many of which have been covered, and I'm going to try not to simply repeat the messages. There are a couple of points, though, that I think are worth either amplifying or, in one case, actually making. I mean, fundamentally, I should point out that I'm a partner and director in the Johannesburg office of PwC. So I'm based in Southern Africa, and I work with colleagues in West and East Africa across the power and utilities space. The first thing to say is absolutely the key is getting the basics right. You can't create a great project in a really bad environment in general. Good projects need to be placed in sustainable environments. So we need to really recognize that. And to me, that does come back to not just government putting the right frameworks in place, but the utility being put on a sound, robust footing so that it can generate revenues from its consumers, which can be used to pay for the power from the IPPs. And one thing that we haven't touched on here, and I think this would come through any program which is looking at helping utilities reform and achieve sustainability, of course, is rehabilitation of what they've already got. And part of the problem in Africa is not just that there isn't enough generating capacity, it's that a lot of the installed capacity isn't actually working to its full capacity. And so there are some really quick wins there. If we can bring those plants up to full operational capacity, that will be cheaper and quicker than building new plant. It will also generate revenues, which can then be used to pay for new plants. So I do think that's something that needs to be explored and might well be an area where DFID could play a really valuable role. The other thing for me is when we look at new capacity, it's the importance of standardization of the bid documentation, the tender procedures. And not just standardization on a one-off basis, but creating programs of capacity. Probably one of the most important lessons for me that has come out of the Southern African experience has been that bidders, embrace opportunities where they can bid for a project or for capacity, and if they don't win, they come back again. They either come back again, or if they can't, they sell the projects to another bidder who comes back perhaps with a better solution. But the key here is that a lot of that effort that is going into bidding in the first round or two is not wasted if they don't win. And so what you get is huge momentum within the bidding community, which has major benefits in terms of driving competition. Now, most countries in Africa are not, well, no country in Africa at the moment is anywhere near the scale of South Africa. But there are opportunities to run on a programmatic basis. Zambia is starting to do it with scaling solar. They had very good results on their first round of bidding, and now they're looking to do another round of bidding. So I would say programmatic approaches are really, really important. The other thing is the importance of having champions within government who will support both reform and tender processes. So that if the private sector is going to engage, it's engaging in a stable environment where it knows that if it puts the effort into participation, that participation will be rewarded, at least with a complete tender process. It may not be rewarded with a win, because they're particularly in a competitive environment, they may not bid the right price, but at least they know that their effort has a point and an end result. And so the finding a champion within government is hugely important. And Sierra Leone, through Henry and others, is doing that. They are sticking to their guns, seeking new investment. And that gives the developers the confidence to hang in there. And as we've touched on, many of these projects take a long time to come through. Hopefully we can speed up that process. But you do need people to know that the government will stick to its guns. So I think those are kind of 3 points, which I'm going to stop there, allow the conversation hopefully to flow back into the auditorium.
Thank you, John. So look, political will and champions who exemplify that are absolutely key. I think what you've said there actually ties in with Mamadou's point that the standardization that we've seen in South Africa is very useful from an investor perspective. I think the other thing actually is that you've got that South Africa example where things are happening. We've got other countries now. Nigeria is securing the first IPP financial closings and other countries as well. So we've got something to build on. Last thing, it's not all about new capacity. I think you've said, Sammy, it's about existing assets, about systems, transmission, distribution, and existing generation and getting that working better. So let's not always focus on gleaming big new plant. That's part of the solution, but it's only part. There's many aspects to that. Okay, so we're going to open this up now for a discussion, and I could stay here for hours discussing these issues. They're very fascinating to me. Actually, we're under some time pressure, and we have to finish reasonably soon. So can I request that we've got some roving mics. If you put your hand up, if you say who you are, if you ask a question in a quite crunchy way, I'm going to take 5 questions, and then we'll come back to the panel who won't attempt to answer all 5 questions. They'll pick off what's relevant to them, and that probably will take us to use up all of our time. So if we can seek 5 questions, I can see one down at the front here.
Just the guy there's got the mic already.
Sorry, okay, we've got somebody with the mic. Then we're going to come to the front, and then let's see whose hands are up. But can you say who you are and ask your question, please?
Thank you. My name is Elisha Tsindikidze. I'm developing a 247 megawatt hydropower in Zambia. Now my question is, what is DFID doing to find a solution to one of the biggest problems we are facing, which is the credit rating of the off-taker? Because you have a $500 million project, but if the credit rating is not there, then it is a very big problem for us. Thank you.
Okay, we'll move to another question. I'm going to slightly rephrase that and ask the panel, what is it that DFID could usefully do? I'm here to learn about how we can shape our approach. So what could DFID usefully do to improve the credit rating of the kind of project that we've just heard about? Now, there's somebody on the second row here, if we can get a microphone over there.
Thank you. My name's Hubert Danso from Africa Investor. We work with the private sector as well as African governments on infrastructure projects, for these purposes, energy. One of the issues that we continually hear about trying to reduce the time frame for bringing some of these projects to market is the extent to which the procurement alternatives are being thoroughly explored in a modern and transparent way. In other words, it'd be interesting to get the panel's views on unsolicited bids. When you speak to the private sector, there are mixed views about unsolicited bids. When you speak to governments, they feel that it's very important for the development finance community to perhaps lead a modern discussion about how to ensure there's transparency around their taxpayers' allocations. But, you know, is there a best practice that can be replicated that's used around the world today in Africa for unsolicited bids in Africa? Thank you.
Important question. Does it always have to be the competitive tenders that we're doing in South Africa, or can we have different routes? So we'll come back to the panel. I can see somebody who's kind of in my line towards the back there. I can see you here as well, but I'm trying not to pick everyone from the front. We're going to come to you next.
Ahmed Damchida is my name. I'm with Energy Culture Limited. We're power developers in Nigeria. My question is there a disadvantage in politicizing regulation and the public utility? Because this has been an issue. If you look at the entire regulators in Africa, they have a short-term frame. And any project that's going to last over 15 years, they cannot make decisions for you today that would remain the same in 15 years. I've seen this change over and over because we own small plants and we're now developing a large plant that has put us in a situation where we always have to adjust, go back to our lenders, go back to equity providers to tell them this has changed, that has changed, because the politicians have made that change. So is there a disadvantage in politicizing regulation and the public utility?
Great, okay. Now, I think what I'm going to do, actually, looking at the time, we've got this person on the front row.
Tom?
You were very keen to ask a question, so we'll get you a microphone. I'm going to ask the panel to come back on the floor, then I'm going to come back, assuming that the panel can give us quite snappy answers. We don't want to turn down questions from the audience. There's still quite a few hands, so we'll come for a second round of questions in a minute. So can you tell us who you are, ask your question? We'll come back to you all in a minute.
Thank you very much. My name is Tom Younger. I'm the MD of Western Power Company, 45 megawatt run-of-river hydro project in Zambia. SIPO is a director sitting next to me. Electra and Infraco are providing funds for the development fund stage. Just to ask perhaps Richard to expand, or anybody else on the panel, there's generally been comments about how difficult it is to find development funding. We were at an IFC conference only a few weeks ago, and exactly the same topic was the main theme of the discussion. And in fact, I think it was someone from the DFID arena of companies who mentioned 64 financed institutions who claimed to provide development funding money, and the last time they checked, sort of 2 of them had money and the rest didn't. And that money is also very expensive. That's not a dig at anybody, don't worry. But development finance money is extremely difficult to get, and it's very expensive. And what is really being done to change that? And we've been at this now for 3 or 4 years, and nothing seems to have changed, quite frankly.
Okay, so I'm going to come back to the panel. As I say, I'll come back for another round of questions in a couple of minutes, I hope. But we've got questions on development funding, regulation as a means to depoliticize the tariff setting. We've got the other more pragmatic ways to allocate contracts and solicitor bids, for example. And what can we do as DFID? It was asked, what can DFID do to help improve the credit rating of particular investments? So let me start with Alex, and I'm just going to work down the panel so you all can get ready to answer. And as I say, don't feel that you have to answer all of those 4 questions. Just pick whatever is most relevant to you.
Okay, if I could pick up on 2. I think it was Elisha on credit rating of utilities. What can DFID do? And I really like, and I don't think it's talked about enough, the case study really in Morocco, where Mazen was established there. And Mazen, for those not familiar, is the renewable energy buyer in Morocco. And it was established, it both runs bids, it provides funding to the renewable energy program, which has rolled out about 500 megawatts of CSP, so concentrated solar, very expensive, very successfully, has done wind projects, has also done PV projects. So Mazen, actually maybe it hasn't done wind, sorry, it's done just solar. So Mazen got a lot of funding, about 2 billion euros from European institutions, and that created the credit-worthy customer, if you like, that allowed the IPP program in Morocco for solar to take off and make it the market leader in Africa. Maybe it's slightly behind South Africa now, but it's been incredibly successful. So how can you create, they provided lines of credit from European institutions because they want to see solar done, And that's what happened in Morocco. That's how it got done. There's now an initiative going around in sub-Saharan Africa to create a collator, a single buyer of renewable energy, maybe starting in Zambia, but a kind of a regional buyer of renewable energy, provide a customer to improve credit support for projects like your hydro project, Elisha. So there are a couple of examples. One is to provide direct loans and have Masdar in the Middle East, in Abu Dhabi, is again the single renewable energy sponsor of projects that's really kicked off renewable energy in the Middle East. So that was one of my questions. And the second one was, I think, I've got to pick up on this. Whoever asked Hubert, I think it was, asked the question about unsolicited bids. Because Infraco, just to note, I think it was highlighted by David at the beginning, we're not in the business of competing with the private sector. And so Infraco, in fact, is not allowed to compete in tender processes. So this question of unsolicited bids is all we do. We do negotiated deals or unsolicited bids. And in various places, like in Kenya, as an example, the PPP Act in Kenya has established now what they call a PIP, a PIIP, or maybe even a triple IP, a publicly initiated infrastructure proposal. So, and that was set up by the World Bank in Kenya through the PPP office in Kenya. And so the answer is, if you look up, or if you wanted to Google and find out a bit more, there's a guy called John Hodges, who was at the World Bank, who's written tons of case studies from Asia, from the Middle East, on unsolicited bids versus tendered projects, and whether they're needed, and what are the right sort of tariff checking and cost checking mechanics for unsolicited bids. And there's a whole world out there about unsolicited bids and why they still do have a place and why they make a lot of sense. And they are. He's got loads of case studies, and in different countries, he gives all the data, how many successful bids have taken place. And the answer is yes, but you need to be able to price check, is the short answer.
Thanks, Alex. Okay, Sameh, do you want to come back on any of those questions?
Yes, I'd like to pick up on the credit rating. There are some instruments that give some support to the off-taker, such as PRG and MEGA, but these are either limited in scope or limited in quantums. I think the key thing is to, again, look for a sustainable solution, which is, where is the cash? Where is the issue? The issue starts with distribution, transmission distribution. You have to go through the painful process of restructuring the distribution company, the transmission company, so that it can stand on its own in the long term. And then it will be able to provide the cash needed for the generation. Once this is resolved in the long term, this is, in my view, the most sustainable thing. You can't, have short-term solutions provided from third parties. The long term has to be a sustainable power sector throughout the whole chain, from the user all the way up to the fuel supply. The second point on expensive development and whether there are players there, this is one of the key reasons why we've acquired GlobalEC, which is to have an existing platform with cash flows, with a management team and a balance sheet, to spend money on early stage development. This is a risky business you're doing. There is a risk-reward profile. And if the developers are not aligned with all the stakeholders, then the project will not happen. So yes, it is expensive, but it's because of the risk profile. And if you sit and negotiate and you have a credible project, you definitely will find a win-win situation between you and any credible, the other long-term institutional developer that has the money for the long term, rather than short-term money from private equity funds that have, the hurdle rate to the GP, and then the difference between the gross and the net IRR, between the money that they need to return all the way to the LP. So I don't think this is a model for private equity funds, early stage development. You have to find a long-term developer, and you have to find a formula that works for both of you.
Okay, Henry?
Yes, well, probably being the only government man sitting here today, shall be expected to handle probably, if not all of them, but at least most of the questions. I'll be very brief. Starting with the credit rating of the utility, I think we will call it credibility. We'll call it viability of the utility, which at the end of the day, the utility is going to be your counterparty in your PPA. So obviously, you want to make sure you're going into business with a credible entity. Now, in our case, for example, our utility, EDSA, is just about a year old, a year and a half old, because we just unbundled at the end of 2014. All of us here who have dabbled in business know that you cannot create viable business in 1 year, not even 2 years. Some people have a 6-year business plan to break even. So you do have to support that utility in one way or the other. And this is why we're setting up the collection account mechanism to make sure that all of the revenue, all of the income, we can see it, and that revenue, that income being collected in a transparent way will give some comfort to investors, comfort that we cannot give with instruments such as sovereign guarantees and so on and so forth. But I think there's a place for the BFI also to come in, because I believe that they can help, if even not in terms of direct backstopping, but in terms of working together with the utility, creative and visible programs can also give, because business is all about the level of comfort. You want to go to business with somebody that you're comfortable with, that at the end of the day, if even you're not included in the cash waterfall system, or you know that eventually you will get your money back. So I think you need to develop the utility to be a bankable entity with which investors will want to do business. Again, looking at maybe medium to long-term funds, which you can plug in and ensure liquidity for the utility to be able to pay their bills. Because in our case, for example, you have a utility that's young, and you have a generation transmission entity that's also young. Now, the generation transmission supplies power to the utility, and if the utility doesn't pay, then they cannot repair their machines, or they cannot buy fuel. So you can see how there's this kind of interaction, and if the system is not supported from the utility end, the cash register end, then there's a threat of collapse. Moving on to the procurement process, solicited versus unsolicited bids, I tend to agree with the previous speaker that some of the most creative solutions come out of unsolicited bids. You cannot always be straight-jacketed and be blinkered. But however, we have an example where DFID and the African Development Bank are supporting a network project that we have. Mike's not working? Maybe I'll use the one. Hello? Okay. We have an example where DFID and the African Development Bank are supporting a network project that we have. This is a project for which a feasibility study had been done because government had wanted to embark on it. But now, in the interest of time, we said, look, for us to now do a new feasibility study, it will take another year. So what we agreed to do, which was a very, very innovative, and I believe that it is something that should be replicated, DFID and AFDB agreed that, okay, we'll hire one of our consultants who's already procured within our own list of consultants to come and validate the studies that you have already done, find out where there are gaps, and fill in the gaps. And through that innovative process, we've been able to save many months. So really, that's something that one should think about. Again, validating, you can do price. For example, sometimes governments embark on tender processes. The processes get to the very end, but then maybe your budget for that particular project, the budget is no longer there, and you need to find gap funding. Now, obviously, no DFI will come in if they probably had not been a party to the project at inception ab initio. But what they can do in the interest of time and in the interest of providing electricity quickly is to validate that process, do price checks, and do price assessment. And finally, let me just talk about the politicizing the utility and the investor concerned about the risk of having to change of government, and then maybe you left in the lurch. Well, what we do in Sierra Leone will make sure that every PPA is ratified by the parliament. So it's not only going to be signed by the utility, but the parliament will ratify your PPA. That will give you the comfort going forward long term, because the parliament always endures if even governments change. So let me stop there and give other parties a chance to respond. Thank you.
Thank you, Henry. Okay, now we're going to run out of time, so can you restrict yourself just to coming back on one of the questions and do that reasonably quickly, because we do want to take a couple more from the audience, then we're going to have to move on for the next session.
Okay, I was actually going to comment on one anyway, which is the unsolicited bid question. Personally, I would, in general, recommend not using unsolicited bids unless you have no alternative or there are really good reasons to pursue that route. Why would you use an unsolicited bid? It seems to me that it should either be quicker or it should offer better value. In most cases where the unsolicited bids have been used in Africa, I don't think it's offered either. And that's one of the reasons why a tender-based process has real advantages. It injects price competition, it injects transparency. Now, there are methods, and I agree, of using unsolicited bids successfully, but they have to be done properly. And so many of the challenges around running good procurements apply just as much to using unsolicited bid approaches. So personally, I'd say they should be used only where it's appropriate and where you can't use competitive tender.
Okay, so let's be careful with unsolicited bids.
Yeah.
The difficulty in finding development funding. There is a game to be played. There are public sources of development funding, and if you have the patience and the persistence, you can find sources of grant funding, free money. But I know you guys have already tapped some of those sources, but there is a cost to them, and the cost is usually one of delay and bureaucracy. I think the private sector has to eventually answer this question themselves. Your project is a very attractive project, and to I think our way of thinking, if it can be developed to a stage where you increase its value, I think you will find private development funding that will take you through to the end. I think, however, in general, African promoters have got to be prepared for the idea that you're going to have to give up control and sell a majority stake, at least in your first project. I think as time goes on and you develop credibility as a experienced group within a country, I think it is possible to aspire to much greater things.
Great, Mamadou. Thank you, Richard.
Yes, to the question of, I'll also take the development funding. You know, when you look at, for instance, as Ubuntu Capital, we're now launching Ubuntu Energy, which is mostly going to be focused on renewable off-grid energy ventures across Africa. And one of the very good models that we've seen so far is Ignite Solar. I think they're here on the first row. And so at some point, we just decided that we'll set up a fund, basically, to target and tackle all those projects, because it's too complex and too cumbersome to go on a project-by-project basis and scale the way you would want, leveraging on development money. So the best approach that we've identified so far is look at the African landscape and understand how much it's going to be required to actually capture some of those opportunities and raise the capital up front to be able to go, because if not, you're going to be stuck every time at each steps if you just rely on that development capital on a per project basis. So you need to be much more strategic around that.
Okay, thank you, Mamadou. Now what we're going to do, I'm going to come back for 3 more questions. I've got a lady there, and then somebody back there. Okay, we're going to add a bonus person. Somebody's been waiting a long time, so that's 4. I'm going to give the panel then, just to prepare you, 1 minute each to come back on any of those questions. Then we need to wrap up.
Thank you. So I'm a limited partner and director at Ignite Power. We are an off-grid project developer and platform investor, and we're developing nationwide implementation of large-scale off-grid solar in sub-Saharan Africa. And I agree with what Alex said earlier, that it's very important to get full government commitment in what we do. It's not just true for a power plant, but it's the same for a very large-scale off-grid project. And Sierra Leone has proven amazing leadership. Rwanda, in which we've worked, has proven amazing leadership. And we're in 5 other countries that are getting into this PPPs framework for off-grid very fast. Now I'd love to hear from you how we can accelerate that, which bodies you think out there are the best place to accelerate that process, where what we're really doing at the end of the day is moving the space of off-grid from what it is today, which is retail businesses doing stuff a bit in a coordinated way, like running and knocking at doors, to move it much closer to what is really infrastructure finance and infrastructure project development by having a coordinated approach, working with the utility, working with the government, and working with a different player. Now, DFID has been an amazing leader.
We need to
Who else can
finish
help
that with the question.
doing that?
Okay, thank you.
Good afternoon, gentlemen. This is Jackie from Goldman, and we provide comprehensive solutions of the wind power. We are office based in Joburg, so me responsible covering the Western African countries for wind power development. So my question is about Sierra Leone. This first is the renewable energy plan, especially the wind power plan in future 5 to 10 years. And what about the electric price present, and also the irrelevant subsidizes? And also, are there any tax references there? If the Goldman entered the market, so are there any can be it possible to sign all the contracts based on US dollars?
Okay,
so
we're going to have to leave that there. So we'll see if our Sierra Leone counterpart can come back. We've got to keep these questions very quick because we're out of time completely.
So last sentence to mention.
Right.
So what's the not relevant Sierra Leone is what's the strategy plan of the electric company in West African countries and key countries there?
Thank you. Okay, we've got the question over there, and then the man behind that. If you can just give us a very quick question. As I say, I'm running out of time.
I'm Munira from the Embassy in Mauritania. Well, we need DFID, that's for sure. So I'm inviting you to come to Mauritania and help us with the regulatory framework. There's a huge potential, but obviously there's a lack of experience in setting up those PPAs. My question is, I think there's a lack of trust between some African governments and private companies wanting to enter the renewable energy market, because based on their experience from oil and gas, that for them it didn't really achieve the economic growth they were hoping for. So they say, why should we allow companies to come again, but not much growth for the people of Africa? So I think that we need, so my question is, how do we build that trust?
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. My name is John Obama from the Cameroon Renewable Energy Company, which is currently seeking fundings for a 50 megawatt wind project in Cameroon. Well, Mr. Perry said us that it's really difficult, incredibly difficult to raise funds when you are a private developer in Africa. And I agree with that, because it's something that we are currently experiencing. And Mr. Kane say that if you want to develop your project, you need to have the commitment of the government, and it's something that I agree with also. In our case, we have the commitment of the government through the signature of the MOU. But the investors need more. They already want the government to indicate what will be the price of electricity. So my question is simple: how is it that are investors really ready to help developers like us to develop our projects and help people, or is there any Is there any other logic behind all this, please? Thank you.
Okay. Now, I'm going to start at this end this time. I'm going to restrict people to 1 minute because we really do have to finish. So, Mamadou, what do you want to come back on there in 1 minute?
You know, to your point, Angela, I think yes, it is critical to have development institutions to have a systemic approach towards this. But the best way you can really address the systemic approach is to work on the regulatory framework and have funding schemes, right, with what you would call first loss mechanism, etc., that really allow to scale at a much bigger level the investments and funding to develop off-grid. And I think I remember having started this conversation with DFID, and I'll be more than happy to resume it, because once we address that, it will really allow an accelerated growth. Yeah.
Okay, Richard.
To the last question about MOUs, MOUs are great, but they're not sufficient. But let's meet afterwards, and maybe we can work out something which makes sense to you.
Okay. John?
Okay, to pick up on the point about building trust, and particularly in the context of economic benefit being seen to come to the country from that investment. If we look at the renewable energy, there is a real opportunity to build local content requirements into these programs. It's been done very successfully in South Africa, and it's being done in other countries as well. So you require participants to provide local jobs, benefits to the community and so on, so that people do feel a genuine sense of ownership. And actually renewables are really well suited to that, because the technology is relatively, parts of it are relatively easy to produce locally, unlike oil and gas, which is on a different scale.
Okay, thank you, John. Henry?
Okay, I think my mic is working now. Quickly, I think, again, as a government man, talking about building trust between government and the private sector, I think you build up trust by performance. Some governments have embarked on significant and ambitious reform programs on bundling their sectors, relinquishing control and all that, but they're yet to see the private sector coming in that kind of big way and perform. So when you don't get that kind of feedback, in spite of what you've done, then it starts to be shaky. And in some cases, government has already given the opportunity to some private sector players, but is yet to reap the benefits. So it's performance. On the tariff and subsidies, I think if I understand your question very well, sir, you were talking about the tariffs and subsidies. Well, from Sierra Leone's perspective, I can tell you that we're doing tariff reform. MCC is doing some tariff reform work with us, and we're doing tariff adjustments to make it cost reflective so that we can attract the private sector and make sure that your transactions are going to be profitable. And the off-taker in our case will be the utility, if from time to time, government does have to step in, but in a limited way. And finally, in the case of Ignite, what we have done, as you know, we have signed a compact with the UK government through DFID. Now, what we have done to develop that to the implementation stage, we have set up a task force. And this task force has as its members the ministry, the regulator, the Renewable Energy Association. We have one of all the private sector players in renewable energy, and even of the President's office. So this will be the body that you will be talking to, and through that body you'll be able to get all the answers and get all the progress that you require. Thank you.
Thank you, Henry. Same?
Yeah, I think the question of building trust, I'd like to ask His Excellency a question. How many times did people come to you and tell you, we're going to build you a power plant, and never showed up again? So the key thing is whoever you're talking to as a government has to have the credibility, the track record. He has to have done it before. If someone has come and tells you, I have 8 assets in 5 countries, we've built power plants before, we would like to work with you as a partner. It has to be a partnership. It has to be someone credible who has done it before, rather than claims to be able to do it in the future.
Thank you. Alex?
Sorry, it's the same question. Building trust, we do it in two ways, I think, that may be slightly different. One is pilot projects. So it's actually putting balance sheet to get projects to put something on the ground before the finance is raised for the project. So in one case in Uganda, for a ferry project, for an island project, we built the ferry first before the debt was raised. So we spent $5 million at risk. And that demonstration really brought trust in the local community, in the national government, and also with the financiers. They saw something happen. So one way to build trust is to do something. And I think the second way to build trust is as you said, Minister, is to do what you say. And I think it's critical that if you go into a country and say you can do something, you've got to be able to do it. So when we sign a project like with these guys at the front in Zambia, it's going to take whatever the budget is. It's $5 million. We put $5 million in a bank account. It's there, and the project will get done. We don't walk away from projects. So I think delivering projects, and we've got, I think as others on the panel have got a track record of delivery, you've got to deliver stuff. And if you can't deliver, then you're just like the next guy or the guy before you who walked into the minister's waiting room. You've got to deliver what you say you can. And having the right funding and the right resource, that combination is what gets projects done. It's people and money. Simple.
Okay, thank you, Alex. So that's been a really rich discussion. I'm not going to try and summarize it, but I did say I want to leave you with a sense that DFID is open for business. We want to do more in the on-grid and the off-grid space across the range of upstream through to project financing. I'm going to put the panel on the spot and say, just to finish, in one sentence, if you can give me a message to take back to DFID, what would you like to see us do more of? I'm glad you're smiling, Mamadou. Can I start with you and work along again? So one sentence, what would you like to see us do more of?
It's a good question. I would say more like spread funding. I don't know if I can call it like this, but it would be more funding that could be leveraged onto.
Right.
Would it be through risk mitigating factors, or first loss, but that could then enable multi-projects to happen by providing either defeat balance sheet or credibility into it, including, therefore, at government level, putting the right level of capacity to. Yeah.
Right. Richard, the one sentence, what would you like to see us do?
I think it's
unavoidable. You can say more of everything if you want.
Yeah, no. More development funding. It is still the area where there is significant need, and we have to come up with new ways to make it more appetizing to local entrepreneurs.
Okay, John.
I'd say give utilities support to achieve sustainability.
Thank you. Henry?
Well, I'll put it this way. How did we beat Ebola together with our partners? We did three things. We had full community ownership. In this case, we will talk about all the people on the ground wanting the project and willing to work with whoever is coming. We had open and honest partnership with our development partners and our donor partners. In this case, different coming in at the early stages, getting to understand what government wants and working within the system. Not working out of the system and waiting until things proceed and then you want to come in. Come in ab initio and work with the system, work with government to make sure that government achieves its objectives. And finally, it was with speed. Speed. There's a need for speed. Thank you.
Thank you. A need for speed. That's a good thing to finish on. Sameh?
I'd just say you have to solve for the whole chain, from the fuel supply all the way to early stage development, generation, transmission, and distribution, because they're all interrelated. And if one goes, then the whole chain goes.
Thank you. And Alex, to finish with.
For me, I've said it a lot today, it's government-side resourcing for us is the critical constraint, and that includes transparency, it includes vested interests, and teaching people the benefit of delivering these projects. So it's really, it's kind of government-side support, whether it's through the utility, through the transaction process itself. It's getting deals done for the right reason, in the right way.
Can I take back what I said? And I'll tell you why.
Yeah.
I thought somebody would say it, but no one said it. It's off-grid. reality today, and we're still very much stuck in the past, in the old model of generation. Forget it. Upgrade is the way to go for Africa.
Right.
Why? The technology is now affordable, and institutions like DFID can really help. It takes 7 years or 10 years to put a hydropower project together. Forget it. We need upgrade.
Right.
Thank you. So I take it back and I say upgrade now. Thank you.
Great. Okay. I think that was for that particular intervention. Can I say it's been a great discussion. There's lots for us to take away. Thank you so much for the spirit which you've embraced the discussion. Can I thank you for that, but can we also show the appreciation to the panel? Okay, and I hope we can all, with many of you in this room, work together on the kinds of things we've talked about. Thanks.